Okay, we're going to learn the Farbrengen that the Rebbe gave on 18th of Cashapp, Bais Bezalel, 1965. Every Yud Aleph, every Torah portion, from its beginning, has a connection not only to the last week, starting from Sunday. In other words, the Rebbe is saying this for Farbrengen on Shabbos. So not only does the Sedge of the week have a connection to the beginning of the week, but rather the entire Sedge has a connection also to the next week. Because the Zohar says that Shabbos blesses all the days of the week. So Shabbos is not only connected to the week before the Shabbos, but the Sedge of the week has a connection to the following week. It has a connection to the week of that Shabbos, and that's why the entire week, starting from Sunday, is called the week of Bais Vayeira. And number two, the Chumash that we're supposed to learn every day of the week is connected to the Parasha reading on Shabbos. So on Sunday, Mazel Tov. So on Sunday you read day one, on Monday you read day two of the second portion of the week. The days before Shabbos are what create Shabbos. So the Talmud says whoever works before Shabbos can eat on Shabbos. So the days before Shabbos are preparation for Shabbos. They make it to be Shabbos. As it says in the Torah, last is Shabbos, you should make Shabbos be Shabbos. The days after Shabbos are blessed from Shabbos. So the way that God gives a blessing is, so to speak, characteristic of God's blessings, that when God adds something, He doesn't just add something small, but the addition that God gives to something is more than the original blessing. In other words, like the Rebbe would often say, when people give the Rebbe a blessing, the Rebbe would often respond, it says in the Torah that God will bless those who bless Abraham, bless the children of Abraham. So not only are you blessed, but you're blessed with the addition that God gives. And when God adds something, He adds more than the original blessing. So the blessing that God gives from the Shabbos is with the main blessing of the Shabbos and plus with God's additional blessing, which is beyond. And all of this comes from the Sedge of the week. So in the beginning of the Torah portion, it says that God appeared to Avram. And Rashi explains that the reason God appeared to Avram was to visit the sick. Rashi's explanation in the Torah is called the wine of the Torah. It means Rashi reveals the secrets. Just like when a person drinks wine, their secrets come out. So too, when you learn Rashi, you get the secret meaning, the inner meaning of the Torah. So Rashi says, what is the meaning of God's visit to Abraham? There's two parts. Number one, to visit the sick. Number two, the word levaker, which literally means bikores, is also the word for criticism. It means to scrutinize. And these two ideas of visiting the sick in a simple sense and to see what's going on are connected to each other. Because through actually visiting someone who's sick, you cause them to become better. So when you go over to someone and see how they're doing, you're correcting the issue as well. And so since all the days of the coming week, with an addition, are blessed from the Shabbos before, so it comes out that all the days of next week are blessed from this Shabbos, from God's visit to Avram, to visit the sick. So there is a blessing for all those who are sick, shalom, to be healed, and be Hashem's will, they should have a complete and speedy recovery. So Rashi, after saying that Hashem came to visit Avram to visit the sick, Rashi adds, said Rabbi Chama bar Chanina, this was the third day after his circumcision, and God came to check on his welfare. We spoke in the previous Farbrengens that Rashi always explains the simple meaning of the verse. So therefore it's understood that these two things that Rashi mentions that Hashem came to visit the sick, and this was the third day after circumcision, are both something that you could see from the verse itself, because Rashi only explains, Rashi focuses on the simple meaning of the verse, so it must be something in the simple meaning of the verse. God appeared to Abraham, that tells you that it was the third day of his circumcision, and number two, that he came to visit him because he was sick. You need to understand, how does Rashi get it? How does Rashi know it was the third day since his circumcision? If Rashi were just to say that he came to visit the sick, since it doesn't say why God appeared to Avram, as in other scenarios where God reveals himself to someone, it says right in the next verse what the purpose of the visit is. So since over here does not say anything that God did in this appearance, so we have to say that this verse is a continuation of the verses before in the previous Torah portion of Lech Lecha, where at the end of Lech Lecha we read how Avram was circumcised. Because Avram was circumcised, that's why God appeared to him to visit the sick. So that's how we get that was the purpose of God's visit. But how do we know it was day number 3? Question number 2, why didn't God visit him on the first day? The mitzvah of visiting the sick, which we learned from God's visit to Avram, is from the first day that someone's sick. So why did God wait with his visit for the third day? And number 3, what is the message for us from the fact that this was the third day since his circumcision? What is the message for us in our lives? Parenthetically, the very fact that God came to visit the sick, we learn in general in the Torah that we have to follow God's ways from 2 other verses. It says you should follow Acharei Hashem, walk after God, the Torah says. It says in another verse, let your children know the way they should go in. So these 2 verses are learned from the are talking about after Torah was given. That's when God instructs us to go in his ways. So what's this idea of visiting the sick? We learn this from God's visit to Abraham. Why are we saying from God's visit to Abraham? We learn we're supposed to go in God's ways from the verses after the Torah was given. This question is also regarding the mitzvah of honoring your father and mother. Avram Avinu fulfilled this mitzvah, but the mitzvah of honoring your father was only commanded on later. So the Rashi says at length, and Rashi says at the end of last week's Torah portion, the reason why Abraham was, it says that Terach passed away before Abraham left his home, was because you might think that it sounds like that Abraham left his father and he abandoned him. So in order that it shouldn't seem that Abraham did not honor his father, therefore the Torah says that Terach passed away before Abraham leaves his home. But the question is, why would people be upset? Why would they think, oh, Abraham didn't honor his father? The mitzvah of honoring your father was only given later on, the Torah was given. So I answered the question correctly before. The question is, number 1, the mitzvah of visiting the sick is something that we get from after the Torah was given. When the Torah says to walk in God's ways. The mitzvah of honoring your father is also something we get from later on. The Jewish people commanded in Gemara. So what's this idea of visiting the sick before the Torah was given? What does that mean? So regarding visiting the sick, you could answer that before the Torah was given, this also existed because there are many things that the Talmud says that are not officially included in the 7 commandments, which are really things that Gentiles are supposed to do. Not officially part of them, because the 7 commandments of the Gentiles are only things they should not do. Regarding the things they should do, those aren't included in those 7. There are more they're supposed to do, which aren't officially part of the 7. But regarding honoring your father, you can't answer this, because that's a mitzvah that was given later on. The Jewish people, after they left Egypt, they stopped off in a place called Mara, and then God gave them the mitzvah of honoring their parents. So if they were commanded before the Torah was given to honor their parents, if all Gentiles were commanded by God to honor their parents, they wouldn't need to be commanded again in Mara. In other words, there was another commandment given to the Jewish people before the Torah was given. And if there was a commandment to honor your father before the Torah was given to all Gentiles, then why did God command the Jewish people later on in Mara? So the fact that God did command them later on in Mara indicates there was no commandment to honor parents. So why is it that people would have a claim against Abraham for leaving his father before and therefore the Torah has to say that he passed away first, in order that people shouldn't think that he didn't honor his father? Why would people have a claim against him? Another answer that you might want to say about, so we're left with a question about honoring your parents. Why would people have a claim? And we have a possible answer for visiting the sick. Maybe visiting the sick was something that Gentiles were obligated to do, as many things they're obligated to, which aren't explicit in the Seven Commandments. Another answer you might say about visiting the sick, welcoming guests, comforting mourners, are all part of kindness. And although post-Sinai, we look at them as different mitzvahs, they're given to us as different mitzvahs, but before the giving of the Torah, they're all included in the generic mitzvah of kindness. And since Abraham embodied kindness, not only did he do kindness, but that was his whole essence, so he also visited the sick, he also welcomed guests. This will explain why it says that in the next verse it says, Avram lifted his eyes and he saw that there were people coming. That verse is connected to the verse before. The visiting the sick and welcoming guests is the same thing. Both are part of kindness. And therefore, God wanted to exchange Avram's mitzvah of welcoming guests with the mitzvah that God did, visiting the sick. And therefore, right after Avram was visited by God, he has these three people coming to see him. They're both part of the same kind of thing. They're both part of kindness. And although it wasn't Avram was doing the mitzvah of visiting the sick, it was God, and welcome the guests was something that Avram was meant to do, but it's all about the same thing. By doing the mitzvah of welcoming guests, mitzvah means to connect to God. The word mitzvah means connection. So Avram is, so to speak, causing that God is welcoming guests, because when you do a mitzvah, you connect to God. So if Avram is doing a mitzvah of welcoming guests, by doing a mitzvah, connecting to God, so it's as if God is welcoming the guests. And visiting the sick, that's the way that God's kindness descends upon the world. So that's what Avram's whole life is about, the revelation of God's kindness. So what God was doing, what Abraham and Avram was doing, are connected to each other. Avram welcomes guests, is really a messenger of God to welcome the guests. He's expressing God's kindness. He's connecting to God. And when God does kindness, what is Avram's whole essence? Avram's whole essence is revelation of God's kindness. So therefore, Avram's welcoming the guest is a continuation of God's visit to him. It's all the same thing. But Avram still felt bad when because the fact there had to be a choice. It can only do one, not the other. So hold on a second. Okay. In other words, if God was doing kindness, the question is, by visiting Avram, so why is it that Avram felt bad there was no guests? Why was he upset there were no guests? He's already doing something, an act of God's kindness. And the answer is because kindness is one of the things there's no limit to, as we say in the morning blessings. Kindness is something that there's no exact amount of how much you're supposed to do. You're always supposed to do more and more. So therefore, Avram felt bad. He wanted to do both. Another possible explanation why Avram felt bad, even though like the mitzvah is being done, right? God's visiting the sick. Why does he feel bad? There's no guests. Another reason you could possibly say that Avram felt bad because Avram's act of kindness is more than God's act of kindness. It's more of kindness to welcome guests than God's visit. And therefore, he felt bad that these three people, that he has no guests, and therefore God sent him these three people. Okay, so that was just an aside. Getting back to our question about the circumcision. How does Rashi know that this was the third day? And how come God waited to the third day? And what are we supposed to learn from this? So some commentaries explain that the reason why God waited to the third day is because on the first day, Avram was busy circumcising all of his family. it says also in the Talmud that God made a covenant with Abraham. The Talmud explains that Avram was afraid that he wouldn't be able to do the mitzvah of circumcision because he's an older man. So God sent his hand with Abraham's hand, and he held on to Abraham's hand and to do the mitzvah of the circumcision. So God did visit Avram on the day one because he helped Avram circumcise himself. And therefore he didn't need to visit him again. And on the second day, the Talmud says there's no danger. The danger of a circumcision is only on day 1 and day 3. So day 1 is not dangerous. I'm sorry, day 1 has passed. Day 3 hasn't come yet. So why should he visit him on day 2? It's not a day that's dangerous. So God visited Avram on day 1 to help him circumcise himself. God visits him again on day 3. So therefore, that's why God waited for day 3. He didn't really wait. He visited him on day 1, and day 2 is not a dangerous time, and therefore he visited him on the next dangerous time, which is day 3. But that explanation leaves us wanting, because number 1, it's a mitzvah to visit the sick even if they're not in danger. Mitzvah visiting the sick is not only when someone's in danger. Number 2, Rashi's opinion is that there is a danger on day 2 as well. Rashi's opinion is that day 2 is the days before day 3 are actually more dangerous, as Rashi says in the Talmud. So the question is, why does Rashi say it was the third day? Other commentaries could say that the reason why God visited him on day 3 is because the third day is considered the most dangerous day. But Rashi says days before are more dangerous. So how come he didn't visit? According to Rashi's opinion, why did God wait for day number 3? Get it? Yeah? With me?
Somewhat. Okay.
God waited to visit him day number 3. Why not visit him on day number 2?
He did visit him on day 2.
No, only day number 1.
Day number 1.
Circumcision.
Right. Day number 2, circumcises people.
Yeah, Abraham visited circumcised people. He wasn't concerned about that. In other words, God held on to Abraham's hand to circumcise himself. God didn't hold on
day 1.
Right, but God didn't help him circumcise the people in his family.
Oh, he didn't.
No.
But Abraham did that on day 2.
One second. That was, first of all, that was on day 1. Second of all, we don't find that God helped him do that. We only find that God helped him circumcise himself. That happened on day 1. Day 1, God is okay. There's 2 things. On day number 1. It could be the reason why God didn't visit him was either because he was busy with circumcising everyone in his family and his household, or because God did visit him because he helped him circumcise himself. Those are 2 possible answers for day number 1.
Right.
But day number 2 has no explanation according to Rashi so far, because according to Rashi, day number 2 is dangerous. According to other commentaries, they say day 3 is dangerous, so therefore God waited for the dangerous time. But even according to their explanation, it's also not really explained, because why? Because it's dangerous, you have to visit him. You visit someone if they're not dangerous too.
Yeah.
So the Ohr HaChaim says like this. The Ohr HaChaim says the reason why God waited for the 3rd day is because you're not supposed to visit someone until the 3rd day. Even though close relatives are allowed to visit someone right away, and God is the close relative of every Jew, as it says in the Torah, as we were learning yesterday, who is a great nation that God is close to them. Nevertheless, God didn't visit Avram until the 3rd day. Why? Because the reason why relatives can visit someone right away, and the reason why other people are not supposed to visit someone right away, is because you don't want to publicize the illness. And therefore you're supposed to wait, unless you're a close relative, you're supposed to wait till day 3. But when regular people visit someone who are not relatives, so then the word gets out. So, but when God visits someone, the word gets out too, even though God is considered a relative of Abraham. However, God's visit is considered huge publicity. It's a publicity in all the worlds that God is visiting Abraham. So the purpose of delaying a visit to day 3 is in order to not publicize the illness. And therefore, God delayed his visit, says the Ohr HaChaim, because he didn't want to publicize the illness. That's why, in general, you're not supposed to visit them until day 3, unless you're a close relative, because you're not supposed to put the word about the illness. It's some kind of ayin hara, causing, it's making the illness into an illness. But when people visit someone who is sick, chassidus, it could cause the illness to become a thing by their visit itself.
Not to be silly, but I mean, this way, every time you have diarrhea or you have food poisoning, you don't have people visit you on the day 1. So it may pass.
Well, besides the fact that it could, right, but even something that medically wouldn't pass. You would say this person is diagnosed with mono, shalom, right? So it's a longer thing, but nevertheless, there's supposed to be delayed till day 3 because it solidifies the illness. The publicity solidifies it in heaven. It causes the angels to say there is a thing here. It works in a similar system to Ayin Hara. Like it causes an announcement of the illness somehow solidifies. But the question, the answer we gave is not sufficient because number one, God can do anything. He can come in a way He's not publicizing it. Number two, when God visited Avram, there was no publicity because when did God visit Avram? He visited him on a very hot day. There's no one around. And the fact that in this world there's no publicity, this world is linked to the worlds above it, that indicates there's no publicity in the worlds above it either. The whole point is that you don't want the accusing angels to go accuse the person sick and then does he deserve to get better. You don't want that to happen. But here, just like in this world there's no publicity, there must have been no publicity in the worlds above it because this world draws its energy from the worlds above it. So the question therefore is, again, why is it that God delayed His visit to day 3? So the answer is like this. Let's first preface and understand something like this. The reason why Avraham did this mitzvah, like all their mitzvahs, is because Avraham fulfilled the Torah before the Torah was given. But there's something unique about the mitzvah of circumcision that surpasses all the performance of Avram's other commandments. All the other commandments that Avram did, he did with his own power, and he did in a way that didn't bring holiness into the objects with which he did the mitzvah with. He didn't cause those objects to become holy themselves. That's something that we're able to do post Mount Sinai, and our forefathers couldn't do. They were able to draw holiness into the physical objects. Number one, our mitzvahs are given to us by God. And number two, our mitzvahs draw holiness into the objects that we do mitzvahs with. Only when God gave us the Torah was it possible to connect the physical and the spiritual. Although the mitzvah of circumcision was given by a God, other mitzvahs that Avram did, he did without God telling him, but it still was only a preparation for Mount Sinai. As Maimonides says, we don't do the mitzvah of circumcision because Avram circumcised himself, rather the mitzvah of circumcision because God commanded us at Mount Sinai. There's something that Avram does that empowers us, but it's not exactly the same thing. It's not the same level of mitzvah. But nevertheless, there is the deeds of our forefathers are a sign for their children, and the only reason the Torah was given, it was through the deeds of our forefathers that prepared for it. And so there had to be one mitzvah that has some similarity to the mitzvahs post Mount Sinai, and that's the mitzvah of circumcision. Number one, God commands Avram to do this mitzvah. Number two, even before the giving of the Torah, there's still some holiness in the physical item that the mitzvah was done with, and it stays there even after the mitzvah is done. And this is alluded to as everything in chassidus, even in the exoteric parts of Torah. When Avram asked Eliezer to make an oath, he said, "Put your hand under my thigh." Why would he do this? This is something which is very modest. And the answer is, a oath has to be done by the one who makes taking the oath, holding on to a holy object, an object of a mitzvah, and the only object before the giving of the Torah where there was holiness that remained there was a mitzvah of circumcision. And that's why Avram told Eliezer to make the oath while putting his hand under Avram's thigh, to hold on to something that had holiness in it. And this is understood that the mitzvah of circumcision, even before the Torah was given, was different to the mitzvahs, other mitzvahs that Avram did, and it had something of post-Sinai energy. There was some holiness there. One of the things that we're meant to focus on, I guess not people like us who don't have this issue, but all mitzvahs are supposed to be done in a way of nature, not through a miracle. Even those tzaddikim were able to do mitzvahs through miracles, are not supposed to. Because the whole point of God giving the mitzvahs to this physical world is to draw holiness in the physical items. And therefore they have to be done in a way that is according to nature, in order that the nature of the world shouldn't be eliminated, rather the nature of the world should be elevated, and therefore mitzvah is supposed to be done in the physical world. And not just the mitzvah itself has to be done without miracles, but the preparation for mitzvah is also supposed to be done without a miracle. As the famous story of the Alter Rebbe, when he was on the ferry on the way to prison, he asked the guy driving the boat to stop the boat, and the guy that refuses to stop the boat, miraculously the Alter Rebbe causes the boat to stop, and then the Alter Rebbe was able to do Kiddush Levana, but he didn't do Kiddush Levana then. The guy gets the boat to start again, and then the Alter Rebbe asked him again to stop the boat, and he realizes who he's dealing with. He realizes this is something that's not natural, and then he stopped the boat. And the question is, why did the Alter Rebbe wait for him to stop the boat the second time? Why didn't he just say Kiddush Levana when the Alter Rebbe caused the boat to stop? And the answer is because a mitzvah has to be garbed in nature. And just like this is true for the preparation for a mitzvah, so too is it true regarding the result of a mitzvah. That the natural things that are supposed to happen as a result of a mitzvah, you shouldn't remove those things in a miraculous way, because then you're missing the mitzvah. So it's understood that if the mitzvah has some difficulties, whether the mitzvah itself has difficulties, or the preparation for the mitzvah, or the result of the mitzvah, they shouldn't be removed or weakened in a miraculous way, because then you're missing the mitzvah. It's similar to what the Zohar says about how mitzvah has to cost something. So the Rebbe, whenever people brought the Rebbe a sefer, the Rebbe always said that for a sefer that you have to pay for a sefer. Mitzvah is not supposed to be for free. It says in Egypt we had food for free, but Kedusha and holiness has to cost. So that's why the Arizal, whenever it came to a mitzvah, he never discussed the price. Whenever the price was, the Arizal paid for the mitzvah, as like Rabbi Gamaliel once bought an esrog, the Gemara says, for 1,000 zuz. So you don't have to look for difficulties, but if there are difficulties there, you don't have to use some unnatural way to remove them. So just like you're not supposed to try to remove the difficulties in doing the mitzvah, and preparing for the mitzvah, you're also not supposed to use unnatural means to remove the results of the mitzvah. And so too regarding Adam's circumcision, his being in the third day post-circumcision and the difficulties of being post-circumcision were necessary to the mitzvah, and this will help us understand the Rashi, and Hashem will go back there tomorrow. All right. Great day.
So all the commentaries about on the third day was the most painful. That's when the elevation of the mitzvah was, because he went out of his way. He got heightened pain.
That's not according to Rashi. Rashi doesn't solve, so it was the most difficult thing. Okay. We'll have to see according to Rashi and Hashem tomorrow. Tomorrow.